Hey there everybody, it's child therapist Mister Stu. Welcome to Bad Kids Don't Exist. This is the podcast that helps adults better understand kids to create environments where kids and their caregivers can thrive. Today, I'm going to be talking with you about effective consequences for kids in today's world. I'll tell you about the two types of consequences, how to use each one, and how to design effective consequences when you need to help shape children's behaviors. But before we jump into that, if you are looking for more videos about children's mental health and how to best support the little ones in your life, this is the channel for you. Be sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss out. Like I said, today I'm talking about consequences. As a child therapist, I hear all kinds of back in my day stories from parents. I don't think I need to get specific about these stories because you've probably heard some too. You also know that if you're talking about consequences and someone goes into a back in my day story, they're about to tell you why they believe kids should be spanked, whooped, or beat, and that would fix all the problems of kids these days. For some reason, adults, lots of adults, think kids would behave better if they could hit kids. For so many reasons, that is false. Now, before you judge me as some liberal snowflake, let me say I believe it's important for kids to have consequences, face consequences, and live with the consequences of their behaviors. But can we first remember that consequences don't have to be bad? If kids work hard in school, the consequence is a good grade. If kids show up to practice and get better at a sport, their consequence is getting to play in the game. If kids give time and effort toward an art project, the consequence is a piece of art they're proud of. If a kid helps out with something, the consequence can be as simple as acknowledgement of how helpful they were. That's going to be really important to remember as we talk about consequences, because kids' brains are wired to see what gets them the most attention from their caregivers. Notice I didn't say the most positive attention from their caregivers. Their brains just want attention. That's because attention means they're being attended to. Being attended to means they'll be kept alive. A good mantra to remember that I teach to all of the parents that I work with is you will always get more of what you give more attention to. If there are more consequences for negative things, then there is acknowledgement or positive consequences for the positive things, you'll see kids do more negative things because the negative things are getting more attention. That means they're being attended to, and their brains really like that. If all you're thinking about is what you're going to do if kids do something wrong, but you're not thinking of what you're going to do when they get something right, you're going to end up like a dog that's just chasing its tail, going through the same cycle over and over and over. So remember that as I tell you about the two types of consequences and how to use them. It's your job to figure out how to make sure the positives outweigh the negatives. With that said, let's jump into understanding the two types of consequences. The two types of consequences are natural consequences and logical consequences. Natural consequences are things that happen naturally. No one has to do anything extra. Logical consequences are things added on after a behavior, but they logically follow the sequence of events. Let me tell you first about natural consequences and why they are awesome. Like I said, natural consequences are those things that happen naturally. You don't have to add them or have to think about what to do. They just occur. Let me give you some examples. For a positive behavior, let's say a child wears their knee pads while they're skating. Well, then they don't get hurt when they fall down. No one had to do anything for that consequence. It just naturally happens. For the negative side of that behavior, let's say the child refuses to wear their safety gear, then they'll get hurt when they fall down. Same thing here. No one had to do anything or add anything after the behavior. It just naturally happened. And natural consequences are really great for a lot of reasons. If you're allowing natural consequences to happen for negative behaviors, you preserve the relationship that you have between you and your child. You don't have to add anything on and have the child feel like you're just being mean or harsh. They see that their behavior caused this thing to happen. And if they don't want it to happen again, it's up to them. You didn't do it to them. Or if you're allowing natural consequences for positive behaviors, you're helping the child to see they can make good things happen for themselves. They don't always need you or need your approval or need you to do it for them or need you to feel proud. But then you can come along and join in that feeling with them, and it's like a double natural consequence. I believe that natural consequences can be hard for parents because parents often feel they have to be the ones to teach every single lesson, positive or negative. But life is really great at teaching a lot of lessons all on its own. Stop exhausting yourself thinking you have to be the one to teach every little thing. Let your child make some mistakes and face the natural consequences for those mistakes. Don't jump in to save them every time, and you'll see they can begin to change their own behaviors. The same is true for positive behaviors. If a child feels you are the bearer of all the good feelings they can feel from doing something positive, don't be surprised when they don't do many positive things when they're away from you. Let them experience those natural consequences of their positive behaviors. Use natural consequences as often as you possibly can. Definitely prevent any major injuries or trauma, but let kids face the natural results of their behaviors, good and bad, as often as you can. Now, I do understand there may be times you want to add a logical consequence for positive behaviors, or you need to add a logical consequence for negative behaviors. So let's talk some now about those logical consequences and some tips for making sure that they are effective. As a reminder, logical consequences are consequences that are added on, but logically follow a behavior. For example, a logical consequence for going to bed on time on a school night is that the child may be able to stay up later on the weekend. That didn't happen naturally. You had to give that consequence, but it makes sense. It logically follows. Let's look at the flip side of that. A logical consequence for not going to bed on time on a school night is having to go to bed early on the weekend to practice and set the routine for the school week. Again, that consequence didn't happen naturally, but it is a logical result of the behavior. When it comes to logical consequences, you always want to think it's not me versus them. It's me and them versus this problem. If you are angry with your child or resentful about the behavior, it's time to take a break before you design a consequence. If you design a consequence out of anger or resentment, it will almost always violate some of these rules for logical consequences I'm about to tell you. To design logical consequences that are effective, you want to get yourself thinking, how can I show them what to do instead of what they did that was wrong? Or another thought is, how can I help them understand why what they did was wrong? Not just that it's wrong, not just so that they'll feel bad, but understand why what they did was wrong. I see fairly consistent pitfalls when it comes to using logical consequences for negative behaviors. Let me take you through 3 of them. The first is adding a logical consequence where an effective natural consequence already took place. Just a few weeks ago, I trained the staff for the summer camps of the Greater Louisville YMCA. We talked a lot about consequences, and one example kept coming up, and that was the example of kids running around the pool. So let me walk you through that one and how it typically goes. Typically, a child will run around the pool, and they'll be told to stop, don't, whatever. They'll slip and fall. And then I'll see an adult yell at them and tell them that they don't get to swim for the next hour. But let's see, there's a natural consequence that already took place. The natural consequence is that the kids slipped, they fell, they got banged up, and they got embarrassed. You don't need to now also yell at them and take away the next hour of their swimming. Instead of adding on a logical consequence, if a natural consequence has already taken place, just reinforce the natural consequence. You can say something like, "That's why it's important to not run. You can get hurt. Are you okay? Okay, don't do that anymore. I don't want you to get hurt." And then they can go back. Guess what? The child has already learned their lesson from the natural consequence: slipping, falling, getting banged up, and getting embarrassed. You don't have to tack something else on. So when it comes to logical consequences, if there's a natural consequence that has already taught the lesson, you don't need another consequence on top of it. Another pitfall I often see of logical consequences is the logical consequence being too extreme. An example I have seen many times is no video games for a month because the child stayed up late one night. Consequences that are too extreme cause resentment. They don't teach a lesson. It causes the child to see it as a me versus you situation rather than you actually trying to help them modify their behaviors for their good. It can also cause the child to give up because why bother? If I've already lost my game for a month, which is an eternity in the mind of a child, why would I do anything I'm supposed to do during that month? You're just going to take it away even longer. Go ahead. I don't care anymore. Because again, if you take it away for a month or if you take it away for the rest of the child's life, both are the same in the child's brain. Both are far too long of a period of time for them to even comprehend. Let's say a child is getting their phone taken away because they aren't studying for a test when they're supposed to. Hey, the phone is going to be taken away until you study for your test. I don't have to take it away for some extended period of time. It doesn't have to be this long, extreme thing, this me versus you battle back and forth. Make sure your consequences aren't too extreme. That is one of the reasons that spanking doesn't work. Spanking, whooping, especially things that are more abusive, those things are too extreme. No child deserves to be hit by an adult. And call it what you want. To a child, a spanking is being hit. An adult hitting a child is too extreme of a consequence. It only builds resentment and causes the child to have a lot of reasons to just give up. So make sure that if there's already a natural consequence, just reinforce the natural consequence. No need to add a logical one. And make sure that your logical consequences aren't too extreme. Think an eye for an eye type consequences. And third, I see often logical consequences that are a non sequitur. They don't logically follow the behavior. An example I see every day, every single day, is a child will do something and they'll get their phone or their tablet taken away. One that happens pretty often is a child will get their phone or their tablet or whatever taken away because they didn't clean up their room. That doesn't logically follow. How does them not keeping their room clean have anything to do with their phone or their tablet? Now, here is an example of where that could make sense. If they were on their phone or on their tablet or on their video game when they should have been cleaning up their room, it makes sense to take those things away. Or if they were on their phone instead of sleeping or instead of studying, it makes sense to take those things away. But you have to explain why it makes sense, why it's logical that this sequence of events is taking place. Now, here's a logical consequence that would make sense if a child doesn't clean up their room. You didn't clean up your room, so you can't get new toys until you show you can take care of the ones you already have. Do you see how that logically follows? If you are just taking the phone, tablet, video game, whatever it is, because that's what they love the most, it doesn't show the child the consequence was a result of their behavior. Instead, they'll feel like it was a punishment that you just enjoyed giving to them. It creates, again, that me versus you mentality rather than the child understanding the consequence is to help them. That is another reason why spanking is ineffective. Hitting a child, even hitting them for hitting, doesn't follow. It doesn't make logical sense. You hit so-and-so and that was wrong. But now someone else is going to hit you and that one is okay. It also tells kids that adults must be allowed to hit them when the adult gets frustrated enough. And if you add on the phrase, I'm only doing this because I love you, then you're telling the child that they can grow up and be hit, and the person who hit them is allowed to say they only did it because they love them. Spanking is an ineffective logical consequence because it's just not logical. Here's the final thing about logical consequences. The real truth is that kids are already harder on themselves than anyone else could be on them. I think adults often have this belief, the whole "you are your own harshest critic" thing only applies to adults. But it applies to kids as well. Kids know when they mess up. And if you're constantly adding on even more consequences for those mistakes or those mess ups or even those poor choices, you're just bogging them down. Logical consequences for negative behaviors are to be used as infrequently as possible. Always be thinking, was there a natural consequence that has already taught the lesson? If so, just reinforce that natural consequence. Then if you do find that you have to design a logical consequence, make sure it's an eye for an eye. It's not too extreme. And also make sure that they make sense and follow logically. The child did this thing, so here is the result. If you'll do that, you'll be using logical consequences effectively. Remember, it should never be you versus your child, even when it comes to negative behaviors. It should always be you and your child versus whatever problem is going on. It can look like kids these days are bad and need more or harsher consequences. But really, adults have been pretty bad at having consequences that make sense and at letting natural consequences do the work instead of feeling the need to always add something else on. Kids, even when they make mistakes, even when they make poor choices, are not bad kids. Some things exist. Some things don't. Bad kids don't exist. I love helping adults better understand kids. I think that helps create environments where kids and their caregivers can thrive. If that sounds like a good fit for you and your next event, click the link in the description to this video or check out badkidsdon'texist.com/booking for all the information you need to hire me as a keynote speaker or workshop leader. I can't wait to partner with you.